thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and
All the factors and
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m. and on Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, on top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, but particularly your great ideas for topics, guests, and subject to be covered on upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston. After all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show here on ACC TV, proudly now in its 29th season. I have a great show and the guests lined up for us today. We're going to talk with someone who has a perspective in some cases and some issues a little different than some of the guests I have on a frequent basis. But I wanted to do that because it's important to have all those perspectives, opinions, and viewpoints. And that is to have it from a young man who deals deeply with the issues, who is committed to the issues, passionate to the issues, does his research and homework and data collection around the issues so he knows with whom he speaks. And I think it's important to hear all voices. This is none other than Mr. Charles Blain, who is the president and CEO of Urban Reform Institute, a market-driven solution to urban issues. When you see him, you'll say, well, where do I know him from? Sunday mornings, Fox 26, the talk show, What's Your Point? And so I'm so glad to have Charles on so we can dive into some of these issues. And we're going to be talking about the whole spectrum, affordability, housing development, poverty, economic mobility, restorative justice, whatever he wants to dive into, and we'll have a conversation about it. It is important, as I mentioned, though, that we really begin to have more of a breadth and depth on conversations from all perspectives. We're only going to get out of this hole we're in and get to a middle ground again, get to purple or get to gray by having these in-depth dialogues, these in-depth conversations, these critical conversations, and find where we can have and develop common ground. In the end of the day, regardless of what, where, who, when, how, whatever, it's going to be back to finding common ground, because you have to move the needle at some point. You just can't sit. All right, enough of that. I can go on. Welcome, Charles.
Well, thanks for having me. No, please do go on, because I think you're exactly right. And that's why I'm grateful for you having me on so we could have this conversation, because I don't think people willingly and earnestly engage in these conversations anymore as much as they used to. And we definitely need them. Otherwise, we're not headed down a bright path. So I appreciate you for having me, and I appreciate this conversation.
Well, I appreciate the work you're doing. So tell us a little bit about the Urban Reform Institute, but particularly geared towards some of the work you're doing here in the greater Houston area.
To kind of give a little bit of background, Urban Reform, we're a nonprofit, two parts of it. There's a C3 and a C4. And really the goal here is to look at a lot of the issues that happen in Houston and in other cities as well. But because we're based in Houston, Houston's our priority, and address them from a free market perspective, just because I feel as though that perspective has often either been ignored or just hasn't been put out there. I think a lot of people who share my political ideology have stayed away from cities and have shied away from addressing those issues. So we want to look at these issues and really want to have a voice in them. And so when I started Urban Reform, the goal was to really focus on City Hall and try to highlight some of the issues that were happening there and get people more informed and more engaged, and also take the information that was happening at City Hall and bringing it down to people. And so that's what we've been doing. And we're working with folks all across the spectrum on a host of issues. I mean, one of the most exciting things that we did was a group out of Third Ward, a civic club that was having issues with the vacant lots and the blight in their community. And we wrote a couple articles on that issue, and they successfully, through their efforts, they successfully got the city to turn over some of these lots and turn them into pocket parks. And it was a really exciting process to see. And they did all of the work. All we did was write a couple short stories about it, but it's just really nice to see that work happening on the ground. And that's the stuff that I love and that continues to drive me.
Well, let's talk about that phrase you used, because I think that's on the ground. making things happen in communities and neighborhoods, neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community, with the citizens involved and engaged in those decision-making processes to benefit their own community. I think more and more that's where it has to go. Government, city hall, legislation, policy, yes, with that's important. But it has to be more from the bottom up, engaged with the people and getting them the sense of what they can accomplish and achieve.
Yeah, definitely. And what was really interesting when I first started urban reform, I was, my niece, she goes to TSU, and we were out at this little co-op near Emancipation Park, and we were talking to this lady who ran the co-op, and she was asking what I do, and I was telling her about that, and she's like, well, that's really interesting, but it just doesn't seem like City Hall is a place for us. It seems like it's a place for people with a lot of money or some, political clout or whatever the case is. It doesn't seem like it's a place for us, but it is. I mean, it's a place of the people and for the people, and their voice should be heard all the time, full stop. And their interests should be represented. And then I think, back to my parents who, I grew up in New Jersey. My parents were custodians all my life growing up, worked a lot of hours and had very little time to engage with City Hall. But unfortunately, City Hall continued to operate without their interest in mind. And I just want people to have their voices heard and have their interests represented, because that is what should be happening. We should be seeing policies that are coming down from not just City Hall, but on the state level as well, that are that people are deeply involved in creating. We shouldn't just be having to deal with what our elected officials on either political side of the spectrum or office or level of government decides that we should have to deal with. We should be deeply involved in those solutions. And so that's what we hope to do, is to try to get people involved in that and try to make it a little easier, because government doesn't make it easy to be involved or to understand what they're doing a lot of the times.
And the people are the city. I mean, that's on the wall in the city council chambers here in Houston. And it's important that we get more back to that, as you said, because I think we have to show how accessible city government is and how your involvement does shape that. And I think maybe, we used to do training sessions around these issues of civic engagement and how do you do it from an engaged perspective. The simple thing of being able to show up on Tuesday afternoons at the city council meeting at the public session and to sign up for your 3 minutes and to have your voice heard by a very simple process of calling the city secretary's office, 713-393-1100, and sign up for your 3 minutes. It's available. It's accessible every week to you as a citizen. You don't have to have a special invitation. You don't have to be a special person. You don't have to have a big title or big name or big money behind you. You just need to call and sign up.
And that's your right as a citizen. And I think too often people don't realize that, while we may elect them to make decisions and to make the tough calls, they work for us. I mean, ultimately we are who is in charge. Yep. And so we need to make sure that those who are working from us hear from us and understand what we want and what our priorities are, because there will be a group or an individual out there making sure that their priority is heard. So you need to make sure that your priority is heard. And in a previous conversation we were speaking, and we both said that it's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. And that's a common phrase that goes around, but it's so true when you're looking at government, particularly City Hall. Those who advocate the loudest and, forcefully and regularly for the issues that they care about are the ones who are going to get them addressed. And, that's no fault of any specific elected official. That's just who is in front of their face all the time. And so
if you know that, then rise to the occasion and do those things you need to do so you will become that squeaky wheel.
Exactly. It's incumbent upon all of us to be that squeaky wheel, for sure.
I always said that the 4 elements: show up, stand up, speak up, and then follow up.
Right.
And where it usually falls down is on that 4th. Well, I came, I talked to them, I spoke to them. They said they're going to get back to me. I called, they haven't called me back. Well, if you stop there, then that's it.
Nothing's going to happen from there. Exactly.
And I think a training session of how to show up. You and I can talk about that later. Maybe we need to offer that.
I think it's a great idea. I think, and what's frustrating is that many people just only get involved just ahead of municipal election cycles, but they need to be involved year round. And I understand it's hard. People work and people have lives that they have to tend to, but this is an important part of your life. It's going to have the most immediate and direct impact, certainly out of any level of government. So instead of watching, CNN or MSNBC or Fox News at night, you should be watching what your city council is doing, because you're going to feel what they're doing more than you're going to feel what's happening in Washington, D.C.
And we need to become more proactive. We're good at reacting. Mm-hmm. Most of the times what we're doing is reacting. after the fact, after something has happened, some tragedy, somebody done me wrong, something. We're always reacting. No, we need to be proactive and plan ahead. We need to understand the issues and challenges in our community. We need to know what the projects are that need to be happening years in advance and really begin to put together that blueprint so that we can be on top of this stuff. Because every week at council meeting, they approve all of these wonderful ordinances and contracts and letting all it's a simple process. Oh, I don't know how to. Once you realize how simple it is to learn how the system works, then you can be a better advocate for your community, for those CIP programs, those capital improvement projects in your community and neighborhood. So you can know what the schedule is, when they're coming, when they're anticipated to come, why was it pushed back a year, et cetera, et cetera. All those things are easy to learn, but you have to be committed.
And no one's a better advocate than a citizen who knows their community. That's the advocate you have.
Let's talk about where we are, though, in the big picture now. Let's shift to the kind of national, state scene that has impact, obviously, on the county and city level.
Yeah.
This great divide we're in. Charles, what are we going to do? I mean, it's a stalemate. It's a standoff. It's stagnation. It's all those words. It's there's some people that, well, it's all about the filibuster. Well, you can't just blame the filibuster, because behind the filibuster is human beings. Mm-hmm. It's human beings who are causing all this anguish and pain and anxiety on both sides of the aisle. So what do you think we can do? What do you see as maybe some way to approach this to begin to get to the center?
I think one of the big things, I was speaking to a friend about this yesterday, is that so often now when you have political conversations or when you see political conversations, whoever, they're on the opposite sides of the spectrum, they automatically think that the person that they're debating with or speaking with has ill intentions and they're a bad person. And
right off the bat.
Right off the bat, pure hatred. And we shouldn't think like that. I mean, I might have a different perspective on how to solve a problem than someone else, but that doesn't mean that because they don't share my perspective, they're evil, or that their solution is evil or rooted in hatred. And I think that we need to start to realize that. I saw an interesting poll. I think it was it was right after this previous November election. And we've been divided for a long time, but certainly it was reaching a peak at that point. But the poll said that outside of politics, when you're looking at civic duties and religious services and all these other things, people are nowhere near as divided as they are when they're speaking about politics. So you can take the same people who would hate each other in politics and put them in a different setting, and they'd be able to find agreement on issues. And I think we need to get back to that, kind of really looking at community-driven solutions. And that's one of the reasons that I do like focusing so much on local government, because it really, potholes and blight and even local accountability, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. Like that, it doesn't come down to that. It comes down to what your priorities are and the communities that you represent. And so I really think that largely we need to just stop assuming the worst about the people that we disagree with and try to actually hear what they're saying. We can still disagree with it wholeheartedly. We can still argue against it, but not automatically assume that their intent is bad, but also get back into the community aspect of things. Take a step back from politics and realize that when we're working on community issues that we can find common ground. And I think that's what is really going to help, is rebuilding those community ties and strengthening the sense of community that we once had that's been lost and eroded over the past few years.
Pothole doesn't care if it takes out a Democrat or Republican car. It has no. So let's talk about, again, I want to keep it kind of on the larger context, because I'm very curious. How has the issue that is so in our dialogue and lexicon these days, how has the whole issue of racism played into this divide? How has the issue of racism not being able to be seen and understood as a systemic institutional issue, how has the inability for racism to be understood as the emotional commitment to ignorance that basically it is, and all the other ways we could describe it, is so wrapped up into the economic political discussion, because it begins that triangle, the social, economic, and political tied together with the human being stuck in the middle of that triangle. It is hard to delineate when you're having these discussions, as you said, politically, what's the underlying current? There's always the underlying current.
Mhm.
And the way they've usually put this is always the question behind the question.
Mhm.
And unless we dig deep enough and begin to be honest about the question behind the question, I don't think we're going to get anywhere.
Right.
Because since in this post-George Floyd environment we're in, people are super hyper and sensitive about all these issues that you mentioned.
Mhm.
Everything is worn on our shirt sleeves, on our shoulders now. If you say X, I'm going to say Y. If you say A, I'm going to say B, just because.
And yeah, so and that's an interesting one. I think, and this might be slightly controversial, but where I look at this is, I think both sides have taken really bad. They've been bad players on this issue, if you will. Instead of having an earnest conversation about it, I've seen like the progressive left often, either claim a lot of things, everything is racist, or assign racism to the right for something that might not be racist, like a statement or something that's a poor statement and it's ignorant, but it just might not be racist. But on the flip side, what I've seen is the right will reactively say that nothing is racist. There's no racism and there's no systemic racism, and we need to just ignore everything that the left is saying. And so it's removed us from a place of having an earnest conversation about it. And I think I've seen the same thing play out, and you probably have seen this as well, in police reform, where the left wants to talk about police reform and reactively the right says, well, there's no issue with police and we need to back the blue. And so instead of having a conversation about it, everybody just runs to their corners and tries to hold it down. And it's unfortunate because there are significant issues that we need to be talking about and need to be resolving. And only as a whole can we come through that and work through those issues, because there's a lot of learning that needs to be done. There's a lot of experiences that need to be shared and need to be understood from folks who have not had those lived experiences. But because it's so wrapped up in politics, people just automatically ignore it. And so I've taken every chance I can, especially over this past year and a half post George Floyd, to really try to educate those conservatives who otherwise would listen to me on a lot of issues about the issue of race and about the issue of police reform and how a lot of this stuff is tied in and the things that they might be missing. And I'm not going to say it's been an easy battle, because it's been very difficult, but it's important to share those experiences. And I've said over the past year and a half that it's incumbent upon people like me who are conservative, who may share values with these people, to let them understand that while I might share a lot of values or I might support some policy you support, if I get pulled over, I'm getting looked at the same way that someone who you disagree with is getting looked at. I've had the same talks with my dad as other people have had, and they need to understand that just because we agree politically does not change that. I'm still seen the same way. And so I've been trying to have those conversations. And again, they haven't been easy, and they've not always been met with interest or open minds, but it's a tough conversation that needs to be had. And it's something I'm going to keep doing, because that's the only way that I think that I can truly try to bring change on my side with that issue. But it's too wrapped up in politics right now that I think that so many people are just willing to ignore it because they want to just go to their sides and pretend that the other side is absolutely evil for what they believe, rather than listening to what people actually have to say.
Is there any truth in either side in the way we project the issues? Let me just say what I mean real quick, speak to what I mean. We weaponize everything. The back to blue was fine as long as the blue were keeping people of color in line, and long as the blue were taking care of those people. But as soon as I want to storm the Capitol, I don't back and support the blue anymore. They're trying to stop me now from doing what I want to do. So I'm going to beat them up, shoot them, kill them, just like I would do anybody else if they get in my way. I thought that was fascinating. This whole back to blue, and all of a sudden, because the blue is doing their job, but they're doing their job against you now. When it was doing it against those people of color, it was okay.
Yeah.
The second thing is, every election cycle, as you know, we weaponize again the issue of the person of color. Going back to Willie Horton, in that campaign of that year, we always find a boogeyman to scare people from fear about the other. And I think in the middle of where we are now, that becomes a dangerous thing. In Texas, it will particularly be a dangerous thing, because starting September 1st, everybody will be able to carry a gun.
Yeah.
Legally. So now if I say something to someone the wrong way, or they take it the wrong way, or they think that I shouldn't have gotten that close in their space, or whatever it may be, who knows what will happen. So I think we're going to have to really, as you said it well, We're going to have to learn from each other, get with each other, talk and have dialogues, not make each other the enemy, not assume that they're wrong. It's something you said to me the other day, and we kind of both agreed. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, perspective, and viewpoint, but not their own fact and not their own data.
Right. Right.
And I think we need to go back to that. When we stay on course, well, look, I'll say this and I'll segue to you. Poverty is a matter of policy choices. We could do a lot to eradicate poverty. We don't have the will and the wanna. I think more and more what you're seeing played out across all spectrums is a scarcity of moral consciousness. It's not about funds. It's not about the lack of ideas. It's a scarcity of moral consciousness and values that people are not willing to stand up and fight for and defend anymore. So we let these social media, we let the fringes take over. We let the things that have nothing to really do about the common good or human beings, we let them dictate. And I think we've kind of acquiesced to those who have a louder voice yelling and screaming than those who can make things really happen.
So that's a lot to unpack, but I want to start with the January 6th things that on January 6th.
Please start with January 6th.
Because on January 6th, as that happened, I remember tweeting out what happened to Back the Blue, and I just got ripped apart because of that take. People absolutely despised it. But you're right. And I think if the stark comparison that cannot be ignored is that when the Black Lives Matter protest happened in the Capitol, there were pictures of rows and rows and rows of armed guards protecting the Capitol.
Right.
As when you juxtapose that on the day of January 6th, that the same response wasn't met.
No, just walk in and take it over.
Right. And so, just looking at that, you can't ignore that. And even with, my message, particularly when it comes to kind of policing that I've always used when speaking with conservatives, is I don't understand how for a long time, and I feel like more and more we're coming around to this, maybe not, the bulk of the group, but many people have been more outspoken about this, is conservatives have often been about accountability in government, but for some reason that one entity, policing, has always kind of skirted accountability. That was the one area where we didn't need to put an extra level of accountability, but yet it's also the one area of government that is, tasked or at least given the ability to kind of take away your liberty, to harm you if so necessary, to all these things. They have the authority to do all of this, but yet they're the ones that we have been reluctant to hold accountable. But yet when it comes to a mayor or a state rep or a budget office or, controller's office or public works or any other department or government official, we've been so willing to call for the need for accountability except for that area. And then that's an issue that I've had for years and have tried to make people realize that they deserve as much scrutiny as, if not more, as every other government entity, agency, and department. The last part of that about poverty, though, I agree. And I think poverty, just like so many other issues, has become this kind of political hockey puck where, everybody has solutions to it, but is anyone really addressing the actual problem, the actual root cause? They want to, and I equate it to some nonprofits. I mean, I think you have a world of nonprofits out there doing good, but you also have some nonprofits that really only focus on kind of building up their brand and getting a bigger and better office. And when really they should be raising money to go out of business to try to solve problem that they exist for. Whereas we don't see I don't want to say all elected officials, but many elected officials, we don't see them trying to solve those problems in that sense, because as long as that problem exists, it keeps a certain program funded, or it keeps a certain effort going, or it keeps a certain base intact. And so they continue to play with this hockey puck. And so we have so many solutions, genuine solutions that can address these issues, but never do we see them get applied. We always just see this back and forth and it devolving into a political argument about who's right, who's wrong, but then who's left holding the bag. It's the folks that we wanted to help to begin with, and they don't get that help.
No, they don't get that help. And there's a lot of money wasted in the name of helping poverty and helping poor people and doing charity. And I'm one of those people that always have said, it's not an either or, it's a both and. Yes, you do charity, which should be a temporary thing until you're willing to do justice to systemic change and eradication the right way. And the downstream thinking of charity and helping people fund charity efforts to feel good many times because they're doing something, and they're helping without realizing the impact that you're making is nil. When you really look at it, unless you're willing to go upstream and take care of the problem at the beginning of the source of the river that causes the bodies to be floating down the river that you take care of as they come down from a charity perspective, then you'll never get anywhere.
Right.
And you'll keep doing the same thing year after year, generation after generation, without any change.
Yeah.
And I think that simple lesson of charity and justice, again, not from an either or, but a both and perspective. We're good at charity. We don't want to talk about justice. We don't want to have the real conversation about this country and what we need to do about justice. And I think the restorative justice piece that really is beginning to be talked about a little bit more is that part that even South Africa realized through their Truth and Reconciliation, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that we probably need something akin to that in this country. We'll probably never get it. We can't even get a January 9th commission to look at the truth of what happened in the storming of our Capitol. We're not going to get a commission to look at the history and the legacy of slavery and racism and poverty today, and how can one eradicate it. I'm not talking about retributions, I'm not talking about reparations rather, and all that. No. I'm talking about systemic poverty, why it exists, and what can we do to eradicate it, which is possible.
Yeah, we have not had, and I mean, I hope in the future we can have an earnest conversation about that, because I don't understand how, folks can argue against looking at issues like that, even if you're just looking at housing. I mean, we know that housing is one of the, if not the biggest, pieces of generational wealth. And we also know that for a very long time, African Americans in this country were prohibited from owning that, and then from owning good assets in housing and in land. And so we know that the history shows us that, and it's still residual impacts of that still exist. I mean, they just passed a bill in the Senate. The Senate led with it, and then the House passed it, and I believe it was signed by the governor, where they were taking out the final remnants of in these deed restrictions, particularly here in Houston, where they were Black people. Like we're just now cleaning that up and taking that out. So you cannot argue that it isn't an issue that impacts us today. And so, it is frustrating that we can't even have a conversation about that without everybody just immediately, again, going back to their sides and having a fight about it. But that's a genuine conversation that needs to be had. And I'm grateful that the legislature looked at that now, but there's more that needs to be looked at. There's a broader conversation that needs to be had.
There's so much richness to be gained in having these honest conversations.
Right.
When you know your history, even that little piece about Black people being only 1/5 of a human being in the Constitution. When you talk about that legacy, people go, "That can't be true. That can't be true." Yes, it was true, but let me tell you why it was done that way. It's all about power and control and voting, because now you're not 1/5, so I got more. It's the Southern states got smart, at least they thought they did. So, but all of this, from healthcare to Jim Crow to what is a living wage, what is a fair, just, all these things we don't really want to talk about.
I was going to say, if you love this country, you should want to talk about those things, because there are ugly parts of this country's past, and they need to be acknowledged and they need to be discussed, and we can't just ignore them and pretend that they didn't exist.
Any closing thoughts and comments?
Just hope more people get involved, especially on the local level in their city government, their county government. Again, like we said, the city is the people, same goes for the county. And these elected officials are very close to you. You have access to them. You can have access to them. So take advantage of that, because if not, someone else will be. So I hope people can get involved. And it's not that hard. It's not that hard at all.
Charles, I want to thank you very much for being part of this. We're going to continue this, I'm sure, at another point. And you can catch him on Sunday morning on Fox 26. Okay, quick closing thought. It's all about communication, treating each other with respect, respecting others' opinion, even if I disagree, and looking at how we can have a true dialogue with the person in front of us, how we can seek common ground, etc. It is those simple things that we all know that we don't do that we should start practicing. Got to get out of here. Again, thanks, Charles Blain, for being with us today. As always, stay well, be safe, and peace, power, and love.